All right, welcome everybody. My name is Laura Schiff. Can everybody hear me okay? Sally, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see? Yep, everyone, yep, good, okay, thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Laura Schiff. I'm an associate director here at the Center for Undergraduate Global Engagement, and I advise on the Oxbridge program, and I'm really excited to see so many of you guys here today. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. Sorry, let me just move this. So just to give everybody a little bit of a history of the Oxbridge program, this is one of the oldest study abroad programs that we work with here in our office. Some of the partnerships with the individual Oxford and Cambridge colleges goes back until the 1980s. So for some of these places, we've had a really long and wonderful relationship and history with them. Just to give a little bit of a context of sort of where we are today, it used to be, years ago that Columbia would only nominate sort of selected students to participate, where you would get sort of a nomination from Columbia and then you would be admitted to the Oxbridge College. Since then, a lot of Oxford and some Cambridge colleges have sort of developed these things called visiting student programs to respond to the popularity of American or students at American universities who wanted to spend time there. And therefore, some new sort of modalities have occurred to allow students to spend some time at Oxford and Cambridge for just a semester. So for today, we'll be talking both about the academic year program and then also the semester program, which are available to you guys as students. So just to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of studying abroad at Oxbridge, and I imagine some of you guys have some context to understanding a little bit about the University of Oxford and the University of Cambridge. I know many students sometimes have even thought about applying to them as full degree undergraduates instead of coming to Columbia. So everyone's at different varying degrees of sort of understanding the whole Oxbridge system. But in my opinion, these are some of the things that we frequently hear from previous returnees about, what they see the benefits of sort of studying, sort of spending some time at Oxford or Cambridge. So the sort of hallmark of either experience is what they would call sort of this individualized tutorial or supervision system. So both Oxford and Cambridge for undergraduate students. And just a quick note that can you guys just make sure that your mics are muted if you're on your phone or on your laptop, just as during the presentation. Thanks everyone. So as I mentioned, sort of the hallmark of it is the tutorial system of sort of working very individually on a certain topic or academic subject, at Oxford or Cambridge. A tutorial, we'll talk about this a little bit later on the presentation, but, a tutorial traditionally might be you in a one-on-one conversation with a faculty member. A tutorial is sort of a class, or you can think of it as a class. Sometimes the tutorials are sort of 1 to 3, but I guess the baseline and the sort of takeaway from this is that most of the courses that you would take while studying abroad at Oxford and Cambridge would be very individualized in style. They utilize this sort of 1-to-1, 1-to-3 system. It's a very sort of Socratic method of understanding and learning. You're sort of working with your faculty member on a topic and sort of guiding your way through it in terms of what subject matter that you're interested in and sort of what within that subject you're interested in. And it's just a really unique system. It really doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, in my opinion. And so it's very sort of individualized. I'm not doing justice talking about it. I think Ryan is here, one of our past participants, or he'll be here a little bit later, and he might be able to explain from a student perspective a little bit more about this sort of individualized studying capabilities of being there. But it's truly sort of the hallmark of the academic experience at Oxford or Cambridge. I also like to mention that there are some pretty famous, what they would call multidisciplinary majors at both Oxford and Cambridge. The one that many people talk about is PPE at Oxford, and then the Human, Social, and Political Sciences at Cambridge. Other sort of benefits of studying abroad at Oxford and Cambridge, at most colleges, you would have the ability to live with full degree students. So you would have sort of that sort of organic social, integration into the life of being an Oxford and Cambridge student. Many students report that as being a real benefit of their experience while in the program. You have the ability to join clubs and societies, not just within the college that you would be applying to, but also with the university at large. And many students will take times to, sort of participate in some of those social activities and really see them as a benefit and a highlight of their experience at either place. Oxford and Cambridge are really well known for these, in some cases, centuries old traditions, things like what we would call formal hall, wearing academic robes to dinner, bops or balls, participating in potentially the Oxford Union. There's so many sort of these traditions that are sort of well known throughout the world, and things that you might see also in movies about either institution. And then, many students report that the Oxford system is sort of unique in that you sort of have the resources of a larger university. So, you'd be studying at the University of Oxford or the University of Cambridge, but you sort of have this pastoral setting of a small college. And I'm realizing that I didn't sort of explain at the very beginning that the University of Oxford and the University of Cambridge are a college system. So each of them have individual colleges that students are affiliated with, which is really sort of the, sort of where students are housed. So, when you go and study at the University of Oxford, you might be at Pembroke College or at St. Peter's College, and in college you would live. They often have some clubs and groups that might be affiliated with just your college, but then you'd also be available to join clubs in outside of just your college. You also would have like sort of a dedicated staff within the individual college, academic advisors and people who would work with you. And so it really sort of creates this sort of smaller, more intimate setting within all the resources of a larger university like Oxford and Cambridge. So I spoke about this a little bit at the beginning, but in terms of the structure of sort of how academics work at Oxbridge. So in most cases, students will do one program of study exclusively. This is true for the full degree students who are at Oxford or Cambridge. So when full degree students are admitted to a certain college as an undergraduate at Oxford or Cambridge, they would be admitted just to take coursework in PPE or in mathematics or in psychology. So they don't sort of have the same sort of liberal arts structure of a university that is traditional in American colleges and universities. It's really specific for a certain subject matter, which is also true of UK universities more widely. But at Oxford and Cambridge, when you're applying, you will be applying to study one subject matter. So as a visiting student, they also ask that students would primarily affiliate with one subject matter. There are some colleges which will allow you to enroll in tutorials outside of the subject matter that you've applied to. But I will say that the expectation really is that you will specialize in one topic. And we can help provide guidance if you're really thinking about potentially going to a college where you might be able to take two different subject matters. We can let you know which colleges might be more amenable to that. But I will also say that you would still need to have, some sort of background in the material to apply for a second subject. So for example, if you were thinking about applying for art history and psychology, the expectation would be that you have had some sort of experience in both subjects, and you would need to sort of pick one as your primary subject. Some of the subjects are organically already linked at Oxford and Cambridge. So I mentioned the very popular one before called Philosophy, Politics, and Economics at Oxford. They have other ones, computer science and math is one of them I can think of. I'm sure there are others that I know there are others that I'm forgetting. So there might be some ways to do some interdisciplinary work there, but again, you really will sort of plan your time being at Oxford and Cambridge to study sort of one subject more intensively. In terms of the structure of courses, so students traditionally take between 1 and 3 tutorials per term, and that really depends on the subject matter. So there are 3 terms during the year, and so depending on your subject, you might take between 3 and 12, 3 and 9 tutorials for the entire academic year. For most humanities and social science subjects, students will take 1 full tutorial, which meets weekly, and 1 half tutorial, which meets bi-weekly per term. I find that for the sciences, students tend to take more tutorials per term, which meet less often. It really does depend. I mean, I've seen a variety of different ways that people have organized it, but I think the main thing that I want to emphasize here is that it would be very normal to only take 2 tutorials per term, and therefore only 6 for the entire academic year. So very different than what you might be used to here at Columbia, where you would take, 4 or 5 classes a semester, to taking just, 6 potentially for the entire academic year, or even just 2 for 1 semester if you're thinking about the semester program. So just a little bit of a difference in sort of what you might expect. We can get into the details if you decide to move forward with the program, but just as a general note, for both Oxford and Cambridge, full degree students are expected to take exams at the end of the year. There's sort of this tradition that at the end of every year, a first year student would take first year exams to move on to the second year, and a second year student would take second year exams to move on to a third year. Visiting students are not usually expected to take part in that exam culture in the way that full degree students are, but it's something that you'll hear about and learn about as being part of the program generally. So something to be aware of. So just talking a little bit about the ways that Columbia students can go to Oxford and Cambridge. So you are allowed to go for either our full year program and taking an entire year at Oxford or Cambridge, or you can apply for a single semester. A single semester would be either doing something called the extended Michaelmas or the Michaelmas term at select colleges. Only some colleges offer this option, and we'll get to that in a second. And then you can also do 2 terms in the spring semester, which is the Hilary and Trinity term at Oxford and the Lent and Easter term at Cambridge. Again, just at some select colleges which offer that option. So to talk a little bit about the academic year-long program, so the college partnerships that we have are listed on this slide. These are Oxford programs which take, Oxford and Cambridge programs which take colleges which take students on a year-long basis. The process to apply from Columbia is that you would actually apply through our website for a nomination, and which an internal committee would review your application and make sort of a suggestion for you about which college you will apply for. So for the academic year-long program, we will choose the college for you based off of your interest and sort of what you're thinking about doing. This application is due on January 6, 2022 for the 2022-2024 year. Academic year students are awarded 36 points for the entire year, should you pass your tutorials and supervisions. I will get to this on the next slide, but some of these colleges which work with students on an academic year-long basis do not allow students to come on a semester basis, especially a lot of our partnerships at Cambridge. There's only one college at Cambridge which admits students on a semester basis, which you'll see on the next slide. But for our partnerships at Cambridge, the majority of the modalities of how Columbia students would go there is for the academic year only. The Oxford colleges tend to have more of these visiting student programs where they would admit them for just a semester. So related to that, for the semester-long program for fall or spring, again, we've listed these college partnerships on here in terms of which ones you can apply for. This list is also on the website for the semester-long program, so you can refer to these colleges for the semester-long program through our website. And on the website, there's also links to all of the colleges, so you can actually explore the visiting student pages of these individual colleges themselves. For the semester-long program, students will only apply to Columbia for something called clearance or approval. That is a very simple application to submit on our website. We'll get to the different application components in a second, but the clearance application basically is just us at Columbia confirming that you're in good standing, that you've made progress in your core requirements, and that you meet the general eligibility requirements to study abroad anywhere. And that is due by January 13th, 2023. You can apply for clearance for all colleges at the same time, so you don't have to apply for clearance for multiple colleges. Students for the year-long program will also apply for clearance, but it's within the application for the nomination itself. So everything is included in the year-long application, but for the semester program, the only thing you need to do on Columbia's website is apply for clearance. You will then be responsible to be applying directly to the colleges yourself if you'd like to pursue the semester option. So you can decide which college you would like to apply to, and you will submit the materials to them directly. Some program colleges have application materials available on their website. Some of them have a paper form, which I might need to give to you to do. They all have different ways that they accept applications from visiting students, but it will be your responsibility to apply directly to those colleges by their stated deadline. Most of the colleges have deadlines in sort of late January, early February, even if you're thinking about going for spring 2024. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about which colleges you would like to apply to. And then for the fall semester, students are awarded 12 points for the singular Michaelmas term, 16 points for the extended Michaelmas term. And for the spring semester, Columbia students are awarded 24 points for 2 terms that you could consider. So getting into some of the nitty gritty of the application components. So as I just sort of talked a little bit about some of the differences between the academic year versus the semester. For the applications to the colleges themselves. So if you're applying for the year-long program, you'll submit these application components to the Columbia website. But if you're interested in the semester program, you'll submit these application components to the colleges directly. Just to, again, reiterate that difference. Every student would need to have a transcript. We tend to see that students who are successful in terms of being admitted to an individual Oxford and Cambridge college usually have a 3.75 GPA and have taken or are currently enrolled in 3 or more classes as it relates to their major. I will say for some students who are thinking about studying English literature, I would personally count literature humanities as one of those 3 classes that you could consider that you've already taken. I would say the same thing for politics. If you're interested in applying for PPE or just politics singularly at any of these Oxford colleges, I think many people would consider contemporary civilizations as being a introductory political theory course. So I think you could count those classes as part of the overall total of classes that you've taken for the major. Every application will also require 2 recommendations, and they are recommendations that you would need to get from someone who has taught you in a college setting. So there's somebody who could review and speak to your academic work. Ideally, one of those would come from a faculty member in your proposed subject. And I would also say that I think a TA is fine. And I'll talk a little bit about some FAQs about recommendations in a few minutes. You'll also need to submit 2 writing samples. Ideally, one of them would be from the subject matter that you're applying for. So if you're applying for history, you'll need to submit some sort of history paper, which demonstrates your, sort of writing skills within history. For those of you who might be applying for STEM topics, this could potentially include a problem set. We've had students for computer science submit pieces of code in the past as a potential writing sample. So those are all things that you could potentially consider as part of your writing samples. And then every college will also require a personal statement. Most colleges will just want a single-page statement about your academic interest in studying at Oxford and Cambridge. I know the Pembroke-Cambridge program does actually have it as short answers rather than a single statement. So if you're thinking about applying for Pembroke-Cambridge, it's a little bit different than some of the other colleges, but a general personal statement is what many of these colleges are looking for. I often get asked what I personally think is a successful personal statement for the program. I would generally give the guidance that the personal statement should be straightforward. It's not similar to a college statement here in the States, where I think you need to talk about sort of how unique you are and sort of set yourself apart from other candidates. I think that the Oxford and Cambridge colleges are looking for a much more straightforward comment about your ability to study that subject matter in the UK or at Oxford and Cambridge specifically. I really encourage students to keep the statement academic and to talk a little bit about what classes you might have taken at Columbia, which will prepare you for studying topics at Oxford and Cambridge. What within the subject matter are you particularly interested in? You could look at some of the sample tutorials that might be available and talk a little bit about which topics you might want to study there. But I would really keep it academic. I think it's fine to include some extracurricular interests or some personal interests in studying in the UK, but my general guidance is 80-20. So 80% of it should really be about the academic experience that you're hoping to have at Oxford and Cambridge, and 20% maybe about a club and society that you want to join, why generally you want to study abroad in the UK, or why generally at Oxford or Cambridge. I think that's a good sort of rule of thumb. I am happy to review statements if you would like to send them to me. I often find that I do have minimal feedback, but I'm always happy to review them on behalf of students. I do just ask that you would give me, sort of 48 hours notice to review. And then just a few sort of notes about the application components. In our experience, most colleges will give preference to full year-long applicants. It's easier for them. It's easier for them to only assign one room for the entire year. It's easier for them to slot you in academically for an entire year rather than a semester. So in my experience, most colleges will give preference for a full year-long applicant. And related to that, some subjects, especially things like STEM subjects, usually can only be studied on a year-long basis because they have a very specific sequencing of courses where it might be that some of the coursework you would start in the Michaelmas term, but would actually continue on until the Hillary term. So some of the coursework, especially for the STEM subjects, might span 2 different terms, making it hard to just do a single semester at Oxford or Cambridge. I put this slide together from some feedback from last year's presentation. So hopefully this is answering some of the questions that might come up that I frequently hear about the process. So, we're talking a lot about the application process, but students are often also interested in what happens if they are admitted to their colleges. And most colleges will take, between 2 or 6 weeks to get back to you about your potential admission. And if you are admitted at that point, you'd be expected to pay, sort of a financial deposit to secure your spot in the program that would be credited toward accommodation fees. We'll talk about study abroad finances in a couple minutes, but the general turnaround time is between 2 and 6 weeks in my experiences. You are allowed to apply to multiple colleges for the semester program. I might recommend thinking a little bit about how to be strategic with that. Some colleges I find, especially some of the Oxford colleges, actually have relationships with each other. So for example, I believe if you apply to Lady Margaret Hall, on their application, they have a button that says, can I also be considered for St. Anne's College if I'm not admitted to Lady Margaret Hall? So you might want to be a little strategic with your applications, especially if some of the colleges have partnerships with each other to be able to think about admission. I wouldn't probably recommend applying to more than 2 or 3 colleges. As you see, it's a big time commitment, and the application is quite extensive. So I would probably say that in my personal opinion, I think applying to 2 or 3 would sort of be the maximum. I don't think it would be necessary to apply to all the programs on our list. Of course, you're welcome to do that if you'd like to, but I would say that my recommendation is 2 or 3 colleges. As I mentioned, for the academic year program, we will nominate you to a college. So if you're admitted, we'll say, thank you for your application. You have been admitted to the Oxford and Cambridge program. We're now nominating you to Oriel College, for example, Oxford. We would sort of work with you to submit that application to the college after you've been nominated. In the case, in my experience in working on the program this is my 6th year, I think, working on the program, most of the time, if we nominate you for the academic year program to the college, most of the time the students are admitted. We do find for some high capacity subjects like PPE, literature, English literature, trying to think of others, computer science, those are very popular subjects. And so sometimes the colleges just can't accommodate the volume of students that we nominate per college. So in that case, if you for some reason are not admitted to the college that we nominate you, we do try to work individually with all students to see if we can move your application to another college. Sort of we would work with you at that point to see if we could find another solution for you. As I mentioned about the recommendation, we do recommend that it come from the subject area that you're applying for. So if you're applying for economics, we do recommend that you would get someone in the economics field or someone in a sort of social science field to talk a little bit about your skills specifically in that area. But I would say, in my experience, it's better to have someone who knows you well rather than someone who would write, something pretty generic. So I would say, usually what I tell students is for the recommendation is who comes to mind to you as a gut instinct when you hear that, who are the 2 faculty that come to mind to you. And I would say that those probably would be the best 2. But at the same time, I do think you might want to think about what type of skills they'll be talking about in your application. So for example, if you are thinking about economics, maybe it's also good to have someone who could talk a little bit about some of your quantitative skills. Could that be somebody from Frontiers of Science? Could that be somebody from a math course that you've taken? I think you want to showcase what you're able to do in the recommendation and have that be something that they can understand as part of the holistic application for the program. I'm more than happy to talk with you about your recommendation choices. It's very common for students to ask their literature, humanities, and CC professors. That's the most popular option that I see, and I think that they can be a wonderful person, especially if you had a good relationship with them, given the size of the class. But again, happy to talk a little bit more about recommendations individually as well. And then if you're considering also applying to non-Oxbridge study abroad options, like Trinity College Dublin or programs in Asia or anything, anything that you would consider thinking about, you usually do have time to apply to those options after you've applied directly to the Oxbridge program. Some exceptions might be if you're thinking about going for the fall, because often those application deadlines are around the same time. And we can be in touch about that, if you're interested in, thinking about how to be strategic about your applications. But there is usually time to apply to other options, sort of thinking about the Oxford and Cambridge program after you sort of started this process. We're one of the earliest processes for the program. I put together this slide of just some sort of this terminology, which I've been talking about a little bit about. I won't go over every single point, but I do think as you're seeing these terms as part of the application process, this is some of the terminology that they sort of think about at Oxford or Cambridge. I think the one that is the most important is this tutorial that I talked about, the sort of individualized course structure that they have, the sort of 1-to-1, 1-to-3 course structure. And just to note that if you're seeing the terminology at Cambridge, they use supervision and tutorial sort of interchangeably at Cambridge versus it's mostly just tutorial at Oxford. So some just general Columbia study abroad notes. I realized last year in the presentation that I talked a lot about Oxford and Cambridge, but a lot of students just had general questions about studying abroad. So just to give some overall context to thinking about the study abroad experience generally, and this would apply for other programs as well, is that most Columbia College and general studies students go abroad during the academic year during their junior year. And then C students can go abroad sophomore spring or for their junior year for certain majors. We've definitely seen applied math and computer science majors from C's go abroad as juniors. I think the one thing to consider as part of this is that for Oxbridge, again, they really will expect you to have some experience in the area that you're applying for. So if you're a second semester sophomore who's thinking about applying, you would have to have demonstrated that you have some experience in the subject matter that you're applying to. I will say for C's that I haven't worked with many non-applied math and computer science majors for Oxford and Cambridge. The way that they structure engineering there is just a little bit different. I'm happy to consider options for other majors. I just don't have much personal experience with placing, Mechie or Chemie majors at Oxford and Cambridge. So that's something I might have to look into a little bit more. But I have had some experience with math and computer science. And then for CC and GS students, a note that major credit is determined by the department. In our experience, most departments are open to taking credit from abroad, but some of them do have what I would call caps on the number of classes that you can take outside of Columbia's campus. So you can check with your department as you're thinking about going abroad. I mean, what I usually would recommend to students is to have a preliminary discussion and say, I'm interested in studying abroad. Are there any classes that I can't take abroad? Is there a specific course that's taught at Columbia that we just don't allow students to take outside of the Columbia campus? And is there a number of classes that I potentially will max out taking while I'm abroad? I mentioned this specifically for Oxford and Cambridge, especially if you're considering the year-long program, because as I mentioned, it's very possible for the year-long program that you might only take 6 classes for the entire academic year. That's a normal course load, is 2 tutorials per term. So, if your department has a cap on the number of classes, let's say 3, which I find to be a very traditional number, you might be taking more classes for your major. You might be taking 6 English literature tutorials, but only 3 or 4 of them will count toward the major. You'll still get points for the tutorials, even if they don't count for the major. But I do just like to mention that to students. And I know even some departments have special rules for Oxford and Cambridge. I think history is one of them, where they usually only allow 3 classes to count from abroad, but for Oxford and Cambridge, they allow 4. So I would have some of those general discussions with your departments to understand, sort of what might be possible from a study abroad perspective. I think for those of you who are thinking about the semester program, as I mentioned, for the fall term, it's very common that you want to only take 2 classes during the fall term at Oxford or Cambridge, 2 tutorials. What does that mean from a course planning standpoint? In my experience, most departments will count by course and not by point. So even though you might be getting 6 points per class, that might only count as 1 class rather than 2 from sort of a major perspective. So, I think generally my advice would be to say that for this program to sort of count on the number of classes rather than the number of points. Again, you are still eligible to use those points that are not counted toward the major toward the overall graduation requirements. So you'll still have points counted toward the general 124 points to graduate, but it just won't be necessarily counted toward the major. For C students, you do need to get approval for every course you would take, every technical and non-technical course, and we would go through that process at length if you decided to move forward with the process. And I can chat with you guys individually about that. I put a link to our general finances page for study abroad. Again, this applies for all study abroad programs, but as a general note, for Columbia College and engineering students who study abroad during the academic year, you will still pay your tuition to Columbia College and engineering. We will then pay, our office, UGE, will then pay your tuition costs to the Oxford and Cambridge College. They will invoice us directly for your tuition costs. For CC and C students outside of that, you are not charged for Columbia housing or dining. Those would come off of your bill for the time period that you would be studying abroad, and you would pay any accommodation cost directly to the college itself. That's why we ask that deposits are credited toward the accommodation costs, because that will be something that you will be paying as a student, because you're not charged for housing and dining at Columbia. For Columbia College and engineering students, if you're on Columbia financial aid during the academic year, as long as you go abroad during the academic year, that aid will travel with you. So you will be able to take your financial aid with you. We will readjust the packages for study abroad with the expected cost of living of the program. For those of you who might be getting financial aid from Columbia to cover your housing costs, that would continue. You might just be eligible to get something called a refund from Columbia, which you would actually use to pay for your housing costs at Oxford and Cambridge. So I think the bottom line for CC and C students is that, if you're on financial aid during the academic year, that will travel with you. The goal of the situation is to keep the family contribution the same. So whatever your family contribution is that you pay to Columbia, you will pay that when you go abroad. For GS students, this is different. So for GS students, you should talk to the Office of General Financing to talk a little bit about, sort of if you're on GS financial aid, how that might apply for a study abroad experience. For GS students, you do not pay tuition to Columbia while you are abroad. For this program specifically, you actually will pay all costs, tuition, housing, and meals directly to the Oxford and Cambridge College, and you will be charged an administrative fee here at Columbia. Because of this, I do believe there are some restrictions on what type of aid from GS you can use while you are studying abroad. So if you're a GS student who gets financial aid here at Columbia, I would make sure to have a conversation with the Office of Educational Financing to understand a little bit about how your aid might translate to this program. This is what we call a Columbia approved program. Yeah, and again, we can talk about finances more individually, or we also encourage students to reach out to the individual financial aid offices, especially to talk about your individual package. Yeah, so this is the end of the formal presentation. I've put the links to the applications here. And again, a reminder that for the academic year program, you would submit all of your materials through the Columbia website. But for the fall or the spring, you would only apply for approval on our website, and then you would apply directly to the Oxford and Cambridge colleges yourself. I've put my contact information on here, and then also a link to the advising page of our website where you can sign up to have an individual appointment with me. I'm going to look at the chat now and keep the recording going just to see if these questions might be applicable for the group. And then I'll turn off the recording and end the presentation so I can take some individual questions from students. But let me first look at the chat. One of the questions was, can we apply to both Oxford and Cambridge? Yes, for the semester program, you are welcome to apply to the one Cambridge College, which takes semester applications. It's actually this one that's on the slide right here, Pembroke College, Cambridge. That's the only Cambridge college which takes programs on a semesterly basis. And then you can also apply to an Oxford college. Yep, that's totally fine. Can you take graduate level courses there if we do not plan to transfer credits back? That's a good question. So generally we do ask that students would take undergraduate level courses at Oxford and Cambridge back. I guess you could take graduate level courses if you were planning not to transfer them back to Columbia's campus. But I would say that you do need to remain enrolled in the equivalent of 12 Columbia transferable credits in order to remain full-time. So you will need to, sort of make sure that you're enrolling in the equivalent of 12, sort of transferable credits per semester in order to remain full-time. So that would be a sort of a point to understand. The other thing I will say is that Columbia College and General Studies also don't transfer general professional credit back to Columbia. So for topics like law, you could take a law course at Oxford and Cambridge that might be available for undergraduate credit, but you wouldn't be able to transfer that credit back to Columbia. Most of the subject matter at Oxford and Cambridge is pretty in line with the liberal arts curriculum here at Columbia. So most of the credit at Oxford and Cambridge does transfer back pretty easily, but law is definitely an area where we would really need to make sure that the course would be able to transfer back. For the academic year, are all application materials, including the recommendations, due on the same date? Yes. So we do ask that all of the application materials are submitted by that January 6th deadline. I will say that for the recommendations specifically, if your faculty need more time, that's an area that we could potentially have a little bit more leeway with. So if your faculty are overwhelmed, it's a heavy time for grading, et cetera, we understand that. So I will say that the recommendation can be submitted a little bit later. I think still within the month of January, but it can be a little bit later than the rest of the materials. But everything else, the writing samples, the personal statement, the transcript, those are all things that we would look with for the January 6th deadline. And then for the application, our application's open. Yes, the academic year-long program, the application is open. You can submit it at any time before January 6th. For the fall and spring, for the semester program, our clearance application is open, so you're eligible to apply for the fall or our spring program. Many of the colleges have not opened up their application yet, and they probably won't until usually like mid-November is the time that we normally see that the applications will open, although it depends on the college. But I would just sort of look at the individual websites. But the components of the application you can still prepare for, even if the application is not open. So you can begin to put some thoughts together for the personal statement. You can begin to think about who you might want to ask for a recommendation, because that will be part of the application when it does open. So if you're admitted, how soon do you need to give a reply to the college? Is a great question. So usually, as I mentioned, most colleges will let you know between 2 and 4 weeks, 2 and 6 weeks after you've applied, if you've been admitted to that college. After that, they will usually give you, it varies depending on the college, but I would say within 10 business days to, a month that you would need to commit with a financial deposit. So it's pretty quick. They do ask for those commitments pretty quickly. I do find that many of these colleges will also operate a waiting list. So if you apply, you might be added to the waiting list. And I find that there's often movement on the waiting list, is what I will say to that. So that's why they ask for these deposits quickly. I think they're just trying to give as many spots as possible to as many students as possible. But they usually do need your commitment pretty quickly. For clearance from Columbia, so the general guidelines for Columbia College students, I can't speak to GS as much, but for Columbia College students, you will, a general sort of guidelines for remaining core classes is usually what I would say, sort of 2 courses left for the senior year, potentially one core class per semester is a general guideline that I would give. I think we can be flexible about that depending on sort of how much of your major you've completed. I think the goal of clearance and approval when we're reviewing is to not have it that the student would need to complete more than 18 points per semester when they return to Columbia. So we're just trying to make sure that you're on track to graduate on time while staying within sort of the 18-point credit limit when returning back to Columbia. So I've definitely seen students who've had sort of 3 or 4 core classes to take when they get back as a senior from studying abroad. So I think that, is generally usually fine, but we just want to make sure that you're on track to sort of graduate. For the foreign language component of that specifically, I definitely highly recommend that you complete your foreign language requirement before studying abroad in general. I think it's just very tricky to have that be an outstanding core requirement. If you're going to prioritize one of your core requirements, I would definitely encourage you to prioritize the foreign language requirement. Just because, the foreign languages don't usually exist in the same way at Oxford and Cambridge that they are here at Columbia. So, you might be able to take like a non-credit Spanish or French course, but they don't have language courses in the same way that Columbia does that are available at all levels. So I usually do recommend that students complete that. But if you can't, you're still eligible to be considered for clearance. Great. Well, I'm going to give it 2 more minutes and then I'm going to stop the recording. I don't know if there's any other general questions that students might have, after I stop the recording. I will be available till 5 p.m. and I can take some questions from students specifically. But again, I'll give it another minute in case there are sort of general questions that might be applicable to the entire group. And actually, I'm sort of realizing, is Ryan here? I haven't looked at the participants. Is Ryan here?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Hi, Ryan. Do you want to give a little testimonial of your experience to talk about your experience at Oxford and Cambridge?
Sure.
At
Yeah.
Oxford. You didn't go to Cambridge, Ryan. I know you didn't go to Cambridge. You
No,
went to
I
Oxford.
didn't.
I'm sorry, but yeah, talk about St. Peter's. Yeah, take it away, Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not much else to add. I think I came a little late, but I think you gave a good description of everything. I didn't come back with a British accent myself. Some people thought I would. But overall, yeah, it was a really good time. I'm really happy I went. I went to St. Peter's College at Oxford. Coursework wise, I really enjoyed it. The sort of format of teaching there obviously is very different. You get a lot more like individual treatment than you do here, especially like depending on what major you're in. So I was doing politics and econ. So because I only did like 2 tutorials a week, 2 tutorials the term there, like I basically only had 1 day a week where I actually had classes because I had them both at on the same day. So that just leaves like the rest of your week where you're doing your reading, you're doing your writing, getting ready for the tutorial, and then spending all that other time doing whatever you see fit. So people spend like a lot of time doing clubs and societies. So I had the chance. I joined my college's rowing team. It was really fun, and I participated in races both of my terms there, and that was my first time ever rowing. So I'm really happy I got the chance to do that. Also joined like some other debate societies, that sort of thing. And it is like definitely a very different culture too. Like I think a lot more, I guess, like diversity of intellect over there. I think that's much more apparent. So people, they have very different views and are very open about it. And I think that was one of my favorite things over there, just learning a lot from different people who thought very differently than I did. And yeah, it's just very, it was a little bit of a shock at first, especially because I went in January and a lot of people, most people already knew one another. But I'm so happy I went. And by the time I was leaving, I didn't want to leave. And yeah, I definitely made some really good friends there who I'm still in touch with now, and I'll be seeing them soon again. Actually, I had one who visited New York, and I saw him too. So I mean, it was just such a great experience, and I definitely wish I could do it again. And anyone who has the chance to, I think they should definitely try. So.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And I should say, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ryan was actually planning to go for the entire academic year, but due to COVID, no students studied abroad in the fall of 2021. So he was sort of forced into the spring semester only. But I'm glad to hear that you made the most of it, as I think many students do. One thing that I forgot to point out, and Ryan, you can give more perspective to this, is that there is a heavy sort of, especially for the humanities and social science subjects, a heavy writing component to being an Oxford student. So Ryan, you can correct me, but were you expected basically to write a 10-page paper every week for your tutorial session? Was that the normal format that your tutorials followed, or was it a little bit different for you? Or
So it wouldn't end up being like 10 pages, at least for me, it wasn't.
yeah,
I would have one essay for each tutorial every week. If I remember correctly, I think they were maybe around like 4 to 6 pages, but it really, I think it's really dependent on like who your professor is for what class or module, because like I had one who wanted a little bit like of a longer paper than other ones wanted. And I know like I'm friends with Anthony, who also went. He was at St. Anne's, and he was doing like CS, and I know he had like problem sheets to do every week too. And I think it's a little rare again for people to go over there and do STEM for study abroad, but that seemed to be like the type of work that they did there. But yeah, so like
yeah.
you do an essay per week for each of them, and then you go there and you sort of start off the tutorial discussion, like discussing your essay and what you wrote about, and then the conversation might go anywhere from there, and they last for like an hour. So.
Yeah, and one thing that I'd be curious your thoughts on is, a lot of Columbia returnees have noted that, as you sort of said, it's more of an expectation that you would only be in tutorials maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and so you do have a lot more unstructured sort of free time. A lot of that is spent doing studying work. You're sort of doing this subject sort of intensely, but as you said, I think a lot of students do participate in clubs and societies. And I will also say that I've heard generally that many students found the work-life balance to actually be better than what they sort of experience generally at Columbia. There's sort of less expectations, and many students sort of do something, sort of 9 to 5, and then have time to be with their friends in the evening or to socialize with each other. I don't know if that's personally what your experience was like too, but most students have reported that the work-life balance actually is a little bit, sort of better compared to what they might have here at Columbia.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely true. Like, I definitely had a lot more free time than I do here. And that's also partly because for at least Oxford, at least, you don't have to take exams. So in my second term there, in Trinity term, like I remember a lot of my friends there who are, like actual students there, they had exams to study for, but I didn't. But even in my first term there, there is a like for everyone pretty universally, I think people spend a lot of time just doing the societies or just hanging out and for me too, that was like a new country for me, so I did take a lot of time to enjoy that and travel around and meet new people, experience new things. But yeah, there definitely is like a way better work-life balance, I think, over there in general. So
Yeah. And I don't know if you feel this way, Ryan, but many students feel very attached to the college. I don't know if St. Peter's, like if you have your gear, we often have students who come back, and there's a very healthy rivalry between the colleges that exists both at
yeah.
Oxford and Cambridge, and then it returns home to Columbia. So, I know that that's a really wonderful part, is getting to know that college community and feeling very connected to it. So,
Yeah, because
yeah.
the student bodies within I think St. Peter's only has like around 100 undergrads like per year. So you get to know like everybody pretty much. And each college like has its own grounds sort of. So you walk around there and you recognize faces much more, you meet people. And like, yeah, speaking of that, like every college typically they have these jackets like called puffers, like these coats that have like the college's like crest or logo on it, and then like your initials, and they usually do the order for them like in the fall. And so like obviously I missed that, but I still really wanted one, so they're doing the order again right now. And my friend over there is he ordered one for me. He's gonna ship it to me, because like even though like I'm not gonna study there again, like I still really want one as a sort of souvenir and that sort of thing. And yeah, I really got to love my college too. And the people there and everything. So
Send me a picture in your jacket when you get it, Ryan. I can't wait
I
to
will
see. Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording because I don't see any other questions. I mean, I can't speak for Ryan and his time, but again, I'm happy to be here for a couple more minutes. But yeah, I just wanted to note that I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then I'll sort of hang out.